Jeff is actually the author of Digital Marketing Essentials, Stuken's first e-textbook. He is an associate professor of marketing in the Marriott School of Business at BYU. He's been teaching digital marketing since 2009. His research has been published in the Journal of Marketing Research, Journal of Consumer Psychology, and other top research outlets, and has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, NPR, Good Morning America, and CBS This Morning, among other national press outlets. He has 5 children and no hobbies. Did you see the 5 children part? I love that. Awesome. Well, without further ado, Jeff, go ahead and take it away. We're excited to hear from you.
All right, thanks everybody for tuning in. This is my first public display or public foray into sharing this work with you, and I'm super excited about it. I have pretty grand ambitions for it. Of course, this is being ProfCon. My primary motivation here is to give you something useful for your teaching, and I think you're going to find that. But more than that, I'm hoping to actually change some fundamental practice of marketing, both in the industry and the way it's taught. And so maybe those ambitions are a little grandiose more than grand. So you can let me know. But I want to talk about first in digital marketing. There are some things that we believe very strongly. And these are sort of things I call axiomatic principles. These are things that we believe without really having strong evidence for them, but they're so intuitive, we believe them pretty strongly in digital marketing. And one is that the value of digital marketing is that we can target only our potential customers, or at least we can do our best to not waste our money advertising to people who are never going to purchase from us, right? So that's super valuable because most products or services we're selling are only useful or only desired by a small fraction of the population, right? If only 1% of the people in the market want our product, we're wasting money advertising to the whole market. So if we can just concentrate our advertising dollars on that 1% who might actually buy from us, we save a bunch of money. Another principle is that we want to target the low funnel customers, right? If they're low in the purchase funnel, meaning they're close to purchasing, we should be able to influence them a lot easier at the bottom of the funnel than at the top, because they have a lot farther to travel if we're targeting people at the top of the funnel, right? So, and this again, I call these axiomatic principles. Nobody's actually has really strong evidence for that, other than they're so intuitive, we simply believe that. I'm not going to try to disavow of those beliefs, but I think there's going to be some nuance that we're going to have to add to those things. Okay, I want to talk about attribution. So if you don't know what attribution is, then you probably came into this this breakout session because you had no idea. You wanted to figure out what in the world I was even talking about. So attribution is how we assign credit to various channels for what actually produced our sales, right? So if you look at this table here, we see organic, or our SEO, seem to be the cause of 39,000 conversions and $119,000 in revenue came because of our SEO efforts. So because of what we were doing, we were able to generate those sales. Well, that was the early thought in digital marketing, was because we can measure everything, we can get a really good handle on attribution, on what is causing our sales. But it became clear to marketers very early in the process that this attribution wasn't 100% reliable, right? The radio guys and the TV guys are saying, hey, you're claiming all this credit. You SEO guys are saying, hey, we generated these 39,000 conversions. But maybe our ads are what made them do the search in the first place, right? So you can't claim full credit for that. And that was very obvious, very clear, very early on in the digital marketing world. People recognized that attribution wasn't perfectly accurate, right? Well, it turns out there's attribution 2.0. There's another problem with attribution, and this is being exacerbated by these AI-based, machine learning-based ad optimizations that all of the advertising channels are doing, being led by Facebook and Google, especially are big players in this. And let me try to explain that with this a simple figure. Here's a marketplace of 10 people. Maybe those 10 people each represent like 1 million people in the marketplace. And of course, there's only a fraction of those people are actually potential purchasers, right? So a lot of those people are never going to buy our products. It's just a product that would never appeal to them. So we want to target those 4 people. Of course, our ad targeting is never going to be perfect. We're never going to be able to establish targeting that's only going to hit those 4 people and ignore those 6 people. So let's say our ad targeting is pretty good and we're able to not waste money on those 4 people, but we're still going to get a mix of some people who will never buy, some people who might buy. And so that's as good as we can do. What these AI-based, machine learning-based optimizations are increasingly trying to get better and better at targeting those people in the green and not the people outside the green, not our non-potential customers. But here's where we have a problem. Let's say 2 of those people are going to purchase no matter what, right? These are people who already know about us. They're already planning to make a purchase. Our advertising is not going to make a difference. Even though we think we're doing a great job targeting our potential purchasers, we might actually be wasting money on advertising to our destined purchasers, or the people who are going to purchase from us anyway. And here's the problem with machine learning and these AI-based optimizations. They are much better at targeting those 2 people in the red than they are at targeting those people in the green. And so these ad optimizations might just be wasting our money advertising to people who would have made a purchase anyway. And the reason this makes attribution problems even more difficult is that if you're advertising on both Google and Facebook, maybe it's the Google ads that are actually producing the sale. Well, Facebook is getting better and better at finding the people who were going to buy because of those Google ads. And so now Facebook and Google are both going to claim credit for all of the same purchases, because the people who purchased are going to see ads on both channels, and they're all going to be claimed by both ad platforms. And so you're going to get all of this multiple credit taking, and so attribution gets even more difficult. So as a result of those problems, there has been a lot of talk about attribution, or about advertising being a waste of money. So Freakonomics recently had 2 episodes where they argue that advertising is a bubble, and the only reason we're spending so much money on advertising is that we believe it works, even though it might not work at all. And so we wanted to do something to actually measure attribution and measure advertising effects more reliably. So here's the field experiment. We actually, and I've taught this in my textbook multiple times, is that in order to get accurate measurement of attribution and the causing, or what's actually causing your conversions, you need to run a field experiment. And so basically how a field experiment might work is you take some people and you won't advertise to them, or you advertise very little to them. You take other people and you advertise to them a lot, and what you hope to see is that those who don't get any advertising don't get much sales, and those who receive more advertising should see more sales. Okay, so field experiments we're in digital marketing, we're not strangers to field experiments. We run field experiments all the time. A/B tests are a field experiment. You take some people, you show them version A of your ad, you take other people and you randomly show version B of your ad, and you see which ad produces higher sales or better results. And those field experiments are being done by practitioners all over the place, and we teach it in digital marketing all the time. So field experiments are great, and everybody knows how to run a field experiment. But what I'm going to argue today is that these field experiments are a little bit more difficult to do, but they're worth doing. So we actually ran a field experiment to measure the return on ad spend of multiple channels for a major bed and box player. So I'm still waiting on explicit permission from our client to reveal who they are. They might or might not be Casper. So they're, this is a very competitive market, very competitive on digital marketing. They spend lots of money on digital marketing, competing with each other, trying to get these sales. And so the way we set up our experiment is that this is going to be geography based. So an A/B test is person based. So an A/B test, you randomly select certain devices who come to your website, you show them some ads, other devices are going to get the other version of your ad. And the reason you can do that is because the experiment starts and ends in that same visit. Or that same ad impression, did they click on the ad or not? And you can see the results of those of your experiment immediately. With sales, especially in the bed and box category, some of these purchases take a while to happen. So you still show somebody an ad and they decide, oh, actually, I think I want a mattress from this company, and I'm going to buy it online, but I'm going to wait a while because I'm not ready to spend $500, $1,000, $2,000 on a mattress right now. And so we can't, and that person, if we treat, we have to set up the experiment in a geography-based manner. So I'll talk about that a little more later. We wanted to measure Google and Facebook. As I mentioned, Google and Facebook are because of these AI-based optimizations, they're all claiming credit for the same purchases. So we want to know, is it Google or is it Facebook that's more responsible for producing our sales? We also wanted to measure prospecting versus retargeting. So I'm sure you know, but just a refresher, retargeting ads are ads that are going to people who have already visited your website. So our client, and I think almost any company in the bed and box category, is going to do a lot of retargeting because, as I mentioned, most people who are seeing an ad for a mattress and decide, hey, I want to buy one, they're not going to buy it immediately because it's just too expensive. They're going to do a bunch of research. And so retargeting ads are really useful for working people down the funnel. They've seen your ad, they come to your website, and now they're mulling it over, right? They're going to take a month before they buy. We want to keep showing them retargeting ads to work them down the funnel to convince them to purchase. Prospecting ads, of course, are just your typical ads that are going out to whatever targeting method you're setting up on Facebook or Google to appeal to whoever you think might be a potential mattress purchaser. So we wanted to see, is all this investment in retargeting, or should we do more advertising and prospecting? Which one of those seems to be more predictive or more useful in producing sales? Finally, we wanted to set up the ad in a way to measure two different types of potential ad synergies. What do I mean by ad synergies? Well, if we advertise on both Google and Facebook, is that more effective than just advertising on one versus the other? Let's say you see a bunch of ads on Google and you kind of get saturated, you start ignoring those ads. But if you're seeing ads on both Google and Facebook, maybe sort of in multiple contexts, the ads saturate less quickly and you're more likely to respond to those ads. That's one version of synergy. Another version of synergy might be, well, if you advertise more on prospecting, then you have a richer pool of people to retarget to. And so maybe your retargeting is more effective by advertising more on prospecting. So together, prospecting and retargeting are better than just the sum of the parts. So that's sort of ad synergies. We set up the experiment to investigate those possibilities. So when we did the experiment design, we had to use something called a factorial design. And I want to explain what a factorial design is. And that's simply, here's a very basic experiment like the COVID vaccine trials. You basically have one group receives a placebo, that's the control group with 0. The other group receives the actual vaccine. And then we see, hey, does the prevalence of sickness a lot lower in the vaccine group? So that's what we're looking for in a very, very basic 2-condition experiment. And so a very basic experiment on advertising might be, hey, in one region, we won't advertise at all, and we see the sales and we should expect to see sales will be lower in the region where we don't advertise relative to the region where we do advertise. But we can only measure one channel that way. If we tried to measure both Facebook and Google, where we say, hey, in one region, we won't advertise on either, and another region will advertise on both Facebook and Google, and we say, hey, at the end of the day, we get more sales in the region where we advertised a bunch. Well, then we wouldn't be able to say, is it Facebook or is it Google that actually produced the sale? So we have to use something called a factorial design. So we say we're going to independently manipulate advertising on each of those channels. So in row 2, we say, hey, we advertise on Facebook, but not on Google. In row 3, we say we advertise on Google, but not on Facebook. And then by comparing row 2 versus row 1, we can say this is the effect of advertising on Facebook. When we compare row 3 versus row 1, we can say this is the effect of advertising on Google. And then when we look at that row 4 where we advertise on both, and we compare it across all those different conditions, we can see if there are any ad synergies. In this case, if you look at a dollar sign as being our the amount of spending, this would be a case where there isn't any ad synergies. The effect of Google and Facebook is simply additive. They don't actually cancel each other out, nor do they have any synergies going on. They just simply, advertising on both produces the effect of either one independently. So that's a factorial design. We don't have 2 channels, we have 4. We have Facebook prospecting, Google prospecting, Facebook retargeting, and Google retargeting. So we had 4 different channels. So it was a rather complex design, and this is what it was. So this is our experimental design. We have 19 conditions, which is a lot more than most field experiments. So it's a rather complex design. But if you look at this, you can kind of see the factorial nature of the design. If you look at Facebook prospecting versus Google prospecting, you notice, let's say if Facebook prospecting is really effective and Google prospecting is not, you should be able to see that in the pattern if you look in conditions 7, 8, and 9. Those are 100% on Facebook prospecting, whereas like on condition 7, Google prospecting got 0. So you should be able to see 7 and 8 and 9 had higher sales, whereas conditions 3, 6, and 9, where Google prospecting is high, you wouldn't see an increase in sales. So because of the way we've manipulated the amount of spending here, you'll be able to investigate which channel is actually more responsible for producing sales. Notice the amounts here. So the way we determine how much advertising would be in different regions was we said, okay, we're going to either cut advertising to 0, we're going to cut it to half the level it was before, we're going to keep advertising at the typical levels, or we're going to increase advertising by 50%. So those are the 4 levels of advertising we decided to do. And we actually wanted to do all 4 levels in all 4 channels. So we wanted to increase prospecting advertising, but the acquisition team said, you know what, if we increase our advertising too much, the quality of our ad targets is going to decrease. And so we didn't want to decrease the quality of any other dimension other than what we wanted in our experiment. So we took out the 150% condition. So this was our design. There are entire classes that are created about design of experiments. And so, but I just wanted to make sure like there's some learning on what a factorial design is. Basically, if you look at the correlations across these 4 channels, they're 0. And so that lets us identify what's the actual cause of this eventual sales. Okay. So then one really important aspect of experimental design is also random assignment. You have to randomly assign different regions or different people, however you're setting up your experiment, to different conditions. If you don't randomly assign people, then you might be some selection bias and you can't be confident that it's actually your manipulation that caused it. It might have been something else. So we randomly assign different regions of the country to different conditions, one of these 19 conditions. But we didn't just do it totally randomly, because one thing is our population varies really heavily depending on what region, right? So you have New York with 7 million people, and then there's also a region in Montana that has 3,500 people in it, right? And so we don't want to compare those 2 regions because there's just the sample sizes are so incredibly different. We wanted to make sure those sample sizes were relatively uniform. And so what we did is we said, hey, let's take the 19 most populous regions and we'll randomly assign one of these 19 conditions across these 19 most populous regions. Then we go to the next 19 most populous regions, randomly assign one of the conditions to those, et cetera, all the way down. You'll notice my index here, the index variable goes to 22 instead of to 19. And that's because there are certain regions we excluded from the experiment, because the idea of the experiment is we want to compare the results in different regions. Well, there are some regions that were just too good. They had too many sales. Our client had too much per capita sales, meaning that region seemed to have something about it that was that they just really liked the mattresses from this company. And so they weren't really good controls because there was just a higher overall level of propensity to buy our clients' mattresses. So we took those ones out. So we ended up with, by the way, we're using Nielsen designated market areas. So Nielsen has divided the country into these regions that are sort of independent that make a really good basis for an experiment. And so we ended up with 198 DMAs, Nielsen DMAs, that we assigned to different conditions. Okay, so we set up the experiment, and then we expected the client to set up to implement the field experiment within a couple days. It took a few weeks because there was pushback from several groups, and we had to get buy-in from a lot of different groups. Number one was the customer acquisition team, right? The customer acquisition team wants to make sales, and so our experimental design actually decreased the amount of advertising, which was going to produce less purchasing. And so the acquisition team was totally opposed to purposely reducing the amount of sales we get. What they didn't know was that our client actually requested that advertising pull back a little bit because they were having a tough time filling orders, and they were coming on Black Friday season, and they knew if they kept advertising at the level they were going to get overwhelmed by orders, because Black Friday is when sales go up across the country, and for the bed and box category is no different. And so they wanted to pull back on advertising some. And so we designed the experiment specifically to decrease the amount of advertising they would have done otherwise. So the acquisition team wasn't happy about it. Our client's ad agency also was not happy about it, and that was because they were paid on commission. So you decrease the amount of advertising, that decreases the commission the ad agency gets. They also didn't understand the purpose of the experiment. They were looking at our experimental design saying, there's 19 conditions, there's no way you're going to find out which condition is best. What they didn't understand was that we weren't trying to find which of the 19 conditions is best. What we were trying to do is vary advertising so that we can triangulate what is the influence of each channel. Basically, we're going to run a regression model, and you'll see that later. So they didn't understand that at first. But in the end, the ad agency works for the client. So the client said, hey, we want to do this. The ad agency was like, hey, we'll do whatever you want because we work for you. Here's a surprising one. Facebook itself was not warned or the client against running this field experiment, but they actually had a pretty good reason. And that is, Facebook has been running all of these ad optimization schemes for years, and our client has spent millions of dollars advertising on Facebook. Facebook has a really good idea of who our clients' customers are. So they have a really good profile of here are the people who are more likely to respond to an ad from our client. And so they are concentrating our client's ad spend on these people. if we ran this, by running this field experiment, we would reset all of the ad sets. And when you reset the ad sets in the advertising settings on Facebook, it resets all of these ad optimizations. And so all these ad optimizations were going to be start all over. And so this optimization that Facebook was going to be running where they're going to lose all of these beneficial optimizations. So that was a concern. However, our client decided to go through with it anyway. And frankly, I don't know if these ad optimizations are really all that effective. It might just simply be more effectively targeting the people who are going to buy anyway, right? So there's some question on whether those ad optimizations actually do what they purportedly do. Okay. So the implementation of the field experiment, it sounds super, super complicated, right? We have 198 DMAs plus the other 12 DMAs that we excluded from the experiment are still going to be advertised to. So we have like 210 Nielsen DMAs. Each one of those DMAs needs a different setting across 4 channels. So we have like 840 different ad settings we have to go into Facebook or Google and set each one of these up individually. It actually ends up being a lot easier. So the way we were able to do that was we say, all right, all of the regions assigned to conditions 4, 5, 6, 13, 14, and 15. Notice those are all assigned 50% in Facebook prospecting. So we say, we go into Facebook, we say, here's our ads, here are the like 65 regions that are assigned to these conditions. We're going to say, here's how much we were going to advertise to those just on the typical ad spend on those regions. We're going to cut that in half. And then we do the same thing for all of the conditions, all the regions assigned to conditions 7, 8, 9, 16, 17, 18, and 19, which were assigned full budget, 100% of their typical budget. So we just needed 2 ad sets for Facebook prospecting, 2 different ad sets for Google prospecting, 3 for Facebook retargeting because we have 50, 100, and 150%, and then another 3 ad sets. So a total of just 10 ad sets across these different 4 channels. So it ended up being a lot easier than doing 840 different ad sets. Of course, the regions that are assigned to 0% got no budget, so we didn't have to set up an ad set for those regions either. So it's actually a pretty simple implementation. And one of the objections or one of the problems with that might be, hey, if you say we want to cut the advertising in half, you're not going to be as precise, right? Because we say we're pooling 65 different regions and here's the amount we expect to spend in those regions, but now you're going to cut it in half across all of those regions. You're not precisely cutting it in half in this region, right? If this region was going to get $5,000, you can't precisely say now they're going to get $2,500. Well, it turns out we can't be precise anyway, because digital marketing, remember, is controlled by all of these ad auctions. And if you allocate $500 in budget to a region, Google or Facebook might spend $300, they might spend $700 because just variations, fluctuations in traffic, fluctuations in how your competitors are bidding for these ads. And so there is no precision. You can't be very super precise in how much ad you spend or how much budget you spend in a particular ad region. So in expectation, actually, this worked out well. And the actual results were quite good too. So if we take a look at, here's the plan, here's the assigned amount of advertising, and then the actual what ended up happening, those numbers don't look like they line up that well, right? You see in the 150% conditions on those retargeting channels, none of them even go above 125%. So we were never able to increase advertising as much as we wanted. But the correlations between the planned and actual is above 0.98 in all 4 channels. And so what we were trying to accomplish here was randomly decrease budget by 100%, by down to 0, down to 50%, staying at the same level or increase it. And we were able to create basically this seismic shift in ad spend exactly in line with what we wanted. And so it worked out really well. We implemented it across 2 months, so there's a 2-month period, which represents $5.7 million in ad spending, and we've done it in such a way that we can actually measure which channel seems to be producing sales. That was a decrease from an expected spending of $9.3 million. That's how much they would have spent had we not run this experiment. So now the analysis, what are we going to run? I mentioned we're going to run a regression, but the problem is we need to control for regional differences, right? So if we say, hey, New York had this much sales, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, these are pretty large regions, but what's the real explanation for why New York got more sales than Miami, Fort Lauderdale? Because it's higher population, right? So we need to control for population. But then there's also other regional differences. Like I mentioned before, some regions have a higher propensity to purchase mattresses from our client than other regions, and we need to control for all those things. But we don't have a good measure of the natural underlying propensity, so how do we control for all these regional differences? Because what we're trying to triangulate is the effect of advertising, not all of these different regional differences. right? So what we did was we used the ratio of during experiment sales relative to pre-experiment sales, right? So we say, hey, in New York, during the experiment, sales went up to 4 million from 3.5 million in the region before, in the period before the experiment. So what explains that increase? Well, it's not any regional difference. It's because of our advertising, right? So we can triangulate what is the effect of advertising by controlling all those regional differences by what was the sales during the experiment, what was the sales prior to the experiment. If you take the ratio of that and we measure that, then we can say, hey, it was our advertising increase. If New York sales went up in New York, it must be because advertising increased on the right channels. If sales went down in LA, that must be because of a decrease on particular channels. And so we can triangulate the effect of advertising that way. Okay, so the analysis we ran was a very simple, straightforward regression model. So in marketing, we have really fancy models, and my intention was to fit a really fancy model. And in fact, I did fit some really fancy dynamic models where you model like the effect going over time, and you say the advertising effect is building up or going down, and I fit some really fancy models. They don't work because what actually identifies the models, what makes it work, is the simple one-time shock where we change advertising. And so we ran a simple one-shot regression model. It's really simple. And the independent variables in this regression model is the actual table right here. These values, those actual columns, those were the actual numbers we used in our regression model. It's just simply 19 rows of the actual each condition's advertising amounts relative to what they were spending before in those regions. And then we have the sales results as the dependent variable. So we're predicting the ratio of pre-experiment sales to, during experiment sales relative to pre-experiment sales as our dependent variable. And then we have the during experiment advertising relative to pre-experiment advertising as the independent variables in a very simple regression model. So if you're familiar at all with the econometric methods, it's sort of like a difference in differences model. Not exactly, but pretty same idea. Okay, so here's the results. What I'm going to show you now is a regression table. So regression tables are not exciting. You're going to be a little underwhelmed by the results until you actually start thinking about the implications of these results. So which channels were actually responsible for producing sales? Turns out, so Facebook prospecting, take a look at the p-values on the right. Facebook prospecting and Google prospecting, both we have statistically significant evidence that Facebook prospecting and Google prospecting are increasing sales. And this is the shocking part. Facebook retargeting, Google retargeting, we have estimates that are quite low. In fact, they're so low, we have no evidence that retargeting did anything at all to benefit sales. We have no evidence that retargeting produced any sales at all. This is incredibly counterintuitive. Almost anybody in digital marketing believes that retargeting is much more reliable and much more effective than prospecting for a lot of reasons. And we'll discuss those in a minute. So how do we interpret these coefficients? These 0.073, 0.113, what does that even mean? Those numbers are actually ad elasticities. Again, if you're not familiar with econometric methods, then ad elasticities probably don't mean much to you. But it's basically, here's how you would interpret those results. If we increased our prospecting ad spend on Google, that 0.113 number means you increase 1%. We expect a 0.113% increase in sales, not 11.3%. That's a 0.113%, right? So that's basically an 11.3% ad elasticity, which is actually quite high. On those that Freakonomics podcast, they mentioned that their measurements were that ad elasticities were only 1%, which is basically not profitable. But 0.113 and 11.3% elasticity is actually quite good. The ad elasticity on Facebook was 0.073, a little smaller. How does that translate to actual dollars? Well, a $100,000 increase in Google prospecting spend is expected to produce a $301,000 increase in sales, which is huge, right? Facebook a little bit lower, but still profitable. An $100,000 increase in ad spend on Facebook prospecting increases sales by $114,000. And the reason for the lower number on Facebook is, number one, the ad elasticity is smaller, 0.073 instead of 0.113, but also because they spend a lot more on Facebook prospecting than on Google prospecting. A 1% increase in Facebook ad spends ends up being less a $100,000 increase in Facebook prospecting spend is a smaller percentage increase, and so therefore it translates to a smaller increase in sales. Okay, so those are ad elasticities, and those come because of the way we set up the regression model, where it's on a percentage basis. And there's more information on that in the case, which will be available later. We'll talk about that later. Okay. So another investigation, we're going to get into deep discussion on why retargeting doesn't seem to be working in this case, but I want to dissect this a little bit more. So there's two general pathways that advertising can work. Number one, it can generate sales where sales would not have purchased. Somebody sees the ad. This is somebody who would not have purchased from the client any otherwise, but because of this ad, now they're going to purchase. The other pathway, which is also just as viable, is simply, hey, somebody was going to purchase, but because of all these ads they saw, they're not going to go for the more expensive model, right? They were going to go for the baseline $500 mattress, but now because of all this advertising, they realize, man, there's some really cool things about these more expensive mattresses. I'm going to buy the $1,500 mattress, right? So we did a regression model where we replaced, instead of sales, the ratio of during experiment sales to pre-experiment sales, we're going to predict, our dependent variable is going to be the number of orders during the experiment versus the number of orders prior to the experiment. So that's measuring how many orders were produced by our advertising, and we find really strong results, even stronger than sales. So we find Facebook prospecting, Google prospecting are very good at generating additional purchases, right? So they're causing people who would not have bought to purchase. What about average order value? So we ran another regression model where we look at the amount spent on those transactions. And it turns out we don't find any evidence that our advertising, that our clients' advertising is actually inducing them to spend more money. It's not making them feel more confident, want the extra add-on purchases, or buy the more expensive mattress. So their advertising seems to exclusively be working through the pathway of making people purchase who would not have purchased otherwise. Okay. So I want to be very clear that, so we ran this field experiment so we could measure the results of prospecting versus retargeting. It turns out retargeting doesn't seem to be doing anything to lift sales, or at least not enough that we can measure it according to these methods. But I want to reiterate that the naive attribution, if you look at the analytics from these advertising, it still was reporting that retargeting is doing a better job. So here's like one condition that was assigned to one region that was assigned to condition 19, which was same advertising as before. So we're just going to advertise as much as we were before. There were 680 purchases in that region. They made $634,000 in revenue. This is what their analytics showed. If you look at their analytics, which channels were claiming credit for these purchases, the return on ad spend on the prospecting channels was lower than 1, so they weren't even getting their money back, versus on the retargeting, according to their analytics, what I call the naive attribution, was saying, hey, our return on ad spend is 3 and 4 times on the retargeting channel. So we need to spend more money on retargeting. How does this happen? So we've done this field experiment to show retargeting actually isn't what's causing the sales, but prospecting is. Why is analytics reporting something totally different? And here's how it works. And I want to improve on the way I explain this, but here's one way of explaining it. Just two hypothetical people. Both of them clicked an ad at some point for the client, went to the website, but didn't purchase immediately because it's a huge outlay of money, right? They didn't have the money just sitting ready to spend, plunk down $1,000 on a new mattress right away. So they took a while. So 29 days later, both of them made a purchase. Well, one of the people, let's say they went directly to the website because they've already been on the prospecting channel. They've already seen the ad. They know what the website is. They just type it in directly. The other person happened to click on a retargeting ad. What I'm going to argue is that neither of these people was the sale produced by the retargeting ad. It was the initial ad that produced the sale. It was because that first ad, they went to the website, decided to make a purchase. It just took them a while to pass it off with their spouse or their partner, to kind of look into it, make sure they wanted to do this, make sure it was when they could get rid of their old mattress. So it took them a while to make the purchase. Both of those people and anybody who clicked on an ad is going to see a bunch of retargeting ads. So let's say person number 1 who day 30 ended up going directly to the website. Well, because they had been marked as a retargeting pool, Facebook is going to show that person ads all over the place. And Facebook retargeting is going to take credit for that sale as long as that person saw an ad in the 24-hour period before when that person purchased. And so Facebook is taking credit for all of these purchases as being produced by their retargeting ads, when in fact what really happened was that they just saw the ads and those were totally incidental to the purchase. They just happened to be shown all these ads because all these retargeting ads are going to people who are going to eventually make a purchase anyway. And even that person's, that second person who clicked on the retargeting ad, of course, wherever retargeting ad they clicked on is going to take credit for that purchase. But maybe that was just happened to be the path they took to get back to the website. When in fact, if they hadn't seen the retargeting ad, they would have gone directly, or they would have done search, whatever it was. They would have ended up back on the website to make a purchase. They just happened to see the retargeting ad and they go, well, I was ready to buy. I'll just click that anyway. So this is how the retargeting ads claim all this credit and naively attribute themselves as being the cause, when in fact they're not actually causing the sale. So that's how that works. And I want to improve on that explanation, but I'm hoping to give a good sense of this is why analytics is misleading, right? Okay, so does retargeting not work? Okay, one thing that drives me crazy is when academics overclaim anything that's happening in their overclaim what their research shows. So I'm not going to say retargeting doesn't work, period. All advertisers should just stop using retargeting, period. But I do want to investigate what is going on with this advertiser and how generalizable is it. So first of all, we know retargeted ads go to people who have previously visited the website. The reason we believe retargeting works is because a prior visit to our website is a really strong signal that they are ready to purchase and they are a potential purchaser, right? So there's not very many people who come to our website who never in a million years would buy from us. The reason they came to our website is because they are seriously considering a purchase. And that signal, the signal of our previous visit to our website, is much stronger than any signal we can get from our prospecting, right? So we do our prospecting ads and we're going to go to these interest targeting, maybe some demographic, different targeting. And we can use that to try to triangulate the kind of people who are more likely to be potential purchasers. But no matter how many of these interest targets we use on Facebook or Google, we're never going to triangulate as reliably as the fact that they've been to our website. So we think our retargeting ads are targeting our potential purchases much more effectively than our prospecting ads. And that's why we believe retargeting ads are better. Turns out retargeting ads, at least for our client, were not better. So which of these assumptions is wrong? Well, clearly this is definitional. Yes, that's what retargeting does. Is a visit to our client's website a strong signal of interest? Absolutely, yes. The proportion of people who are ready to purchase a mattress online is really, really small. The fact that they've been to the client's website is a super strong signal. So that's not an errant assumption. That's absolutely correct. Is that a better signal than what they can get on prospecting? Yes, it is. That's true too, right? So these things are true, and yet we still have the retargeting is not working, despite the fact that the targeting on retargeting is much more effective, right? So what is going on? And here's the bomb I'm dropping. Here's what I want to change all of marketing practice, is that advertising works by informing customers and letting them make a decision, not twisting their arm or convincing them or persuading them of something that they don't believe. If you get the right people and you show them information on this is a product we have, we think it's good for you, and they can make the assessment themselves on, yes, this actually, I think this would be beneficial, this is something I want to buy. That's how advertising works. And that is much more likely to happen on a prospecting ad than on a retargeting ad. On a prospecting ad, they've seen your ad for the first time, or it strikes their fancy for the first time, so they click on the ad and they go to the website. They get all of this information from your website, and that information is the basis on which they are persuaded to either buy or not, right? If they then are seeing all these retargeting ads, well, those retargeting ads cannot supply them with new information, or at least that much new information relative to the prospecting ads. So those prospecting ads are not working them down the funnel. They're simply being shown to people who are either destined to purchase or destined not to purchase, regardless. And the prospecting ads claim all this credit when in fact they're actually not doing that much to influence purchase. So I guess I'm sort of tipping my hand, at least telling you how generalizable do I think these results are. I think they're quite generalizable. I think that in general, retargeting is not nearly as effective as we believe because of these structural biases in the way those are reported. This is sort of like the new phrase I've come up with is that analytics is structurally biased in favor of retargeting just because of the way it works. Those naive attributions are going to exaggerate the contribution of retargeting, when in fact it is the prospecting and the informative advertising that's actually producing the sales. Okay, implications for teaching. What do I think you should be taking away from this? Number one is I think you should be teaching that retargeting might not be nearly as effective as is naively reported in these different analytics. The analytics are structurally biased in favor of retargeting. In fact, it's not actually producing nearly the amount of sales that that is being reported in the channels. Number two is, all right, if you're gonna still do retargeting, I wouldn't actually recommend cut retargeting to zero, right? Because our experiment shows that there's retargeting is not nearly as effective as prospecting. But it doesn't show that it's not effective at all. It just simply wasn't effective enough to show the results. And frankly, if you have a different client, different advertiser, might see different results, right? So I wouldn't say cut frequency down to zero. And even our client, I didn't say cut it down to zero. I just recommended they scale back. Well, one easy way to scale back on retargeting is to employ frequency caps, right? If you're retargeting, if you're not employing frequency caps on retargeting, a lot of your ads are going to show the same person 20, 25, 50 ads in the same day. Clearly, those are not being effective. Those are not effective retargeting ads. Make your frequency caps 1 or 2 a day. If you're not sure if it's working or not, make sure it's still going, but don't saturate the same person with the same ad. So employ really aggressive frequency caps, and also structure your ad copy so that your retargeting ads are showing different information. If you buy into the sort of the bomb I dropped that advertising works primarily through informing people, make sure your retargeting ads are just as informative as your prospecting ads. You're giving different information, different appeals in your retargeting ads than you were in your prospecting ads. Another thing I think you should be teaching, frankly, I told you I want to change the entire practice of marketing. These kinds of field experiments should be done, and I'm actually trying to make these happen. I want to work with clients all over the country, all over the world, doing these types of field experiments. They're expensive. Our client lost a good amount of money in foregone sales by reducing their advertising. Turns out they want to do that anyway. We can actually run the experiment, I think, to limit the amount of lost or foregone sales, but still they are expensive, and you lose some money, but you gain knowledge that I think is really valuable. My back of the envelope calculations were that our client probably lost a net $2 million by running this field experiment based on, okay, we cut back on advertising, which cut back on sales, but the net decrease in sales was like relative to how much they cut back on advertising was they lost probably out on $2 million. So that was an expensive field experiment, but with how much money they're spending, knowing that they can cut back on retargeting, they're going to make a lot more money in the future, right? So, so these field experiments should be done, and these field experiment methodologies should be taught to your students. They should be knowing about A/B tests anyway, right? Those are done for them. But this experiment, basically how you run a field experiment. You need random assignment. They should know that. The idea of these geography-based experiments, right? A/B tests, you don't need geography-based experiments. But geography-based experiments are already being done, and I believe they're the way of the future. I think they're going to be done a lot more commonly in the future, and I'm going to try to make that happen. Factorial designs, just the idea of them. Clearly, you're not going to do an entire course on design of experiments. That is a course and taught often in engineering schools. But just the idea of how you set up an experiment to do multi-channel attribution there, I think is useful for them to know about. And then the idea of doing a multi-channel experiment. So in the textbook, Digital Marketing Essentials textbook, I've put multiple times the best way to learn about something or to measure something is you need to run an experiment. Well, now I'm actually going to add on this case so that they know a little bit more about how to run an experiment and how to run multi-channel experiments. Okay, so let's revisit back to the beginning. I told you these are the axiomatic principles that all digital marketers seem to believe, and that is we save a bunch of money by targeting our potential customers, and that targeting our low funnel customers is more profitable than high funnel customers because low funnel, they're already about to purchase. It's a lot easier to influence them, right? So let's first tackle that second one. Should we be targeting low funnel customers? I think absolutely not. Your low funnel customers are people who are already at a high information base. It's hard to give them novel information that's going to tip the scales, right? They probably already made up their mind about whether they're going to purchase or not. So targeting low funnel customers, I don't believe is actually more profitable. I think that might be an errant assumption that digital marketers are making. What about that first one? Targeting potential customers. That's clearly can't be wrong, right? It's not going to be more profitable to target people who are not going to buy from you. But we need to add some nuance to that assumption. And the fact of the matter is, if you have a product that is heavily advertised, if your brand awareness is pretty high, then targeting your potential customers is actually targeting your destined customers. You're wasting a lot of money targeting people who are going to buy from you anyway. So just because retargeting can more reliably target people who are considering a purchase doesn't mean it's more profitable, because those people might already have decided to purchase. And so targeting your potential customers is not just the be-all end-all in targeting. It's really what we want to do is target people who can be influenced by our advertising. And that's more important than targeting people who are potential customers, because a lot of those are people who are going to buy regardless of your advertising. Okay, so there's a lot to take in. I hope that was valuable, and I hope that was insightful. I'm writing up, I've already written up the case. I'm still waiting on final approval from the client to reveal their identity. I've written it up the case where I've actually talked about who the client was. So that case is written up. I'm also in the process of creating a video case for those of you who do use the Digital Marketing Essentials videos. That video case will also be available. And so I'm still in the process of creating that. Those will be available later this month or early next month, I hope, so you can peruse those. And so thank you for listening. I think now we'll take questions. I have been ignoring the chat. I will open up the chat and see what there is, but maybe Adam, if you want to jump in and show me any of those questions, I can start answering.
All right. Well, thanks, Jeff. Great presentation. We all learned a lot, really good insights about digital marketing and attribution. We have a lot of questions for you, so let's hop right into it. First question is, what type of attribution model was being used in the analytics platform? And how about comparing your results with different attribution models and doing a sensitivity analysis there in the analytics platform?
Yeah, great suggestion. Sorry, I'm not going to even attempt your name. Well, maybe I will, Nazuk. So thank you for that question. Fantastic. Yes, most of the platforms, Google Analytics especially, lets you use different attribution models, right? So we have last click attribution, the first click, linear, all these different attribution models. But the default attribution models are actually different on Google and Facebook. On Facebook, their attribution is that if you have, basically, they're going to claim credit for any purchases that happen on your website. You're going to have Facebook Pixel installed on your website. So Facebook's going to be able to observe any purchases that happen. And they're going to match up any purchases that happen on your website to anybody who saw an ad within the last 24 hours. That's what I mentioned in that, you know, when I showed you those two different people, two different pathways, day 1 versus day 30. If that person came directly to your website, if they happen to be on Facebook and they saw an ad from the client within the last 24 hours, Facebook's going to say, we did that. Hey, they just barely saw an ad from us. That must have been us, right? And then Facebook's also is, if they clicked on an ad within the last, I think it's 7 days. For some reason, I want to say 3 days, but I think it's in the last 7 days. If they clicked on an ad, maybe it's 3 days. If they clicked on an ad and then purchased within that 3-day or 7-day window, whatever it is, then Facebook's going to claim credit for it. Google, on the other hand, their default attribution when you're doing most reports, so their default is last click on some places, but in some reports, if you're doing multi-channel reports, their default is whatever, so it's last click attribution, but it's also last click regardless of when that was within the last 30 days, right? So if somebody clicks on the one ad and then 30 days later they make a purchase directly, it's going to be attributed to that last advertising click instead of the direct channel. It's not going to be direct, it's going to be attributed to that last ad channel. So, so basically that was the method being used. And here's the thing, if you did a bunch of different models, which I absolutely recommend, it's in the textbook, right? So if you want to do some sensitivity analysis, do different attribution models, see which the results were. If you do those different sensitivity analyses and you do different attribution models, different attribution methods, and you compare them, the results will differ, but they won't ever get to what we got in the field experiment, right? They will still always report, regardless of how you're doing it, it's going to report that that retargeting is doing better than prospecting, most likely, just because the way it's set up and the way it ends up getting credit, especially in a purchase like a bed and box, that it takes them a while from the first ad click to the actual purchase. Chances are at some point in there, they saw several retargeting ads and they might have clicked on one just out of sort of a follow-up curiosity. So, regardless of the attribution method, it's going to exaggerate the results of the retargeting ads. But great question.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Here's the next question from Mark. Wouldn't data-driven attribution tease out some of the naive attributions? It already examines the situation from a counterfactual perspective as to what if this person who saw the prospecting ad on day 1 did not see the retargeting ad on day 30?
Yeah, fantastic questions. You guys are, yeah, you're all very up to speed on attribution. This is fantastic. Yes, data-driven attribution that's the idea, is it's supposed to create these counterfactuals. So it can look at the people who saw the prospecting ad, and it's going to compare. Okay, we have a bunch of people who saw prospecting ads. If prospecting ads are responsible for the purchase and retargeting ads or not, it's going to find the people who saw a bunch of retargeting ads compared to the people who didn't see any retargeting ads, and then you should see, hey, they're purchasing at the same rate. Retargeting must not be doing it. So frankly, what I would say is I don't know for sure, but my guess is that data-driven attribution might not actually be able to triangulate it, just because there might not be the case where they can actually construct the counterfactual sufficiently to find people who didn't get retargeting ads. Because if they've been to our client's website, they're getting retargeted like crazy, right? Our client spends so much money on retargeting ads that almost everybody who has been to the website is going to see a ton of retargeting ads. And so I just don't know if the data itself is going to have enough variation in retargeting to be able to see that it's not retargeting that's causing it. So I can't be 100% certain, but it might not be the case that data-driven attribution would correct it. In addition to the fact that data-driven attribution is only available to certain advertisers. I think my client spends enough on Google that Google would make that available, but I'm not sure. I actually haven't asked my client. I don't think they're using data-driven attribution. Excellent question.
Awesome. Next question is from Kelly. Would these results vary for a more frequent, less expensive purchase, like a pair of shoes?
Absolutely, I believe it would, right? So the results will vary. The question is, how much would it vary? And would it be the same results? Would it be that actually retargeting ads would be better? In that case, it's like a pair of shoes. Retargeting ads would probably be less likely to be trying to remind you to work you down the funnel, or would that be more for the purposes of getting you back to purchase another pair of shoes because you've already purchased, right? These are your loyal customers, and you're just sending them retargeting ads to make them aware of other pairs of shoes that they haven't seen before. In which case, yeah, the results could be very different. And that's frankly, I think it's an empirical question. We actually need to test it. We've only done this one field experiment with the one client. I would love to do it with hundreds more clients and see how these results vary based on industry, based on the customer purchase process, customer purchase length, customer purchase cycle, etc. Haven't done it yet, would love to. But it's also a philosophical question, right? So what role does retargeting have? So based on the knowledge that retargeting doesn't seem to be working in this case, that all of the influence happened on that initial ad exposure and visit to the website. All right, knowing that from this sort of bed and box category, what would you say? And that's, I think, a really good case discussion point. And so that'll be one of the questions that go along with the case.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, are you okay to take a few more questions? I know we're running a little bit short on time, but these are awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love these questions.
Thanks. All right, so we have Richard Hanna up next. He asks, have you considered varying the frequency for retargeting? Is it possible that the repetition from retargeting is driving the final sale, but not the click?
So you're actually putting instead of, so I think I'm going to restate the question, make sure. Good to see you, Rich, by the way, or at least hear from you. So the question is, yeah, so one of our conditions could be, let's just, instead of varying the amount of spending on retargeting, let's vary like the frequency caps. In some places we'll do more frequency caps, or we'll do some other way of manipulating how many retargeting ads or how frequently they see these retargeting ads. Yeah, that's something else we could investigate, right? I think the results we did of just how much you spend on retargeting was sort of our first pass. I think that was the most effective lever we had, and so that's what we wanted to do. Is it possible that repetition from retargeting is driving the final sale, but not the click? Let me see if I understand that question. I'm going to rephrase it and see if that's what you're asking. Is it that repetition is actually driving the final sale, but it's not driving clicks? It's not driving like a final click to the website. I think the answer to that question is no. That there's no way, because of the way we did it, this repetition from retargeting isn't actually driving the sale, and I think that's what our results show pretty definitively. It's not anything that's happening on retargeting because of the way, like in some conditions where they saw no retargeting ads at all, there was no difference in purchase, right? The retargeting didn't seem to boost, the lack of retargeting didn't seem to boost the purchase. So I might be misinterpreting your question, but my initial response is that I think the experiment set up as we did it was pretty definitively shows that it's not retargeting. Anything that's happening on retargeting that's actually driving the sale.
Awesome. Yeah, Rich, just let us know if you want us to clarify that. But moving on to the next question from Lawrence, does it work differently with low involvement products, low cost products over high cost, high cost, high involvement products?
Yeah, I would love to run that experiment. And there's multiple ways you could say that we could expect to see different results. One would be, first of all, in prospecting versus retargeting and low involvement products, you're getting a lot more people who purchase on that very first one, right? So there's going to be less of a bias in your naive analytics or naive attribution, biasing it in favor of retargeting, because a lot of these people who see your prospecting ad, they're going to buy in that initial response, right? And then it might be, but I would actually, like, philosophically, I would expect that even a low involvement product, retargeting would still probably not be that beneficial in the fact that, like, okay, they came to the website, they decided whether or not to make a purchase. Is retargeting going to continue to work them down the funnel? I don't think it will, right? I don't think there's going to be novel information or much persuasion happening in those retargeting ads. I still think retargeting ads are not likely to be super effective even in that case, right? Again, it's an empirical question as well as a philosophical question. My philosophical belief is that probably not. It's not going to make a big difference. But again, I would love to run the test to show that for sure. And I see the next question. I really want to answer this one. Nazuk, thank you for this question. So the synergy, yeah, I mentioned I wanted to measure synergies. And we did run that. And the way you run that is you run a simple interaction term, right? So we investigated both kinds of synergies, as the interaction between Facebook and Google, or the interaction between prospecting and retargeting within the same channel. We didn't find any statistically significant results, but again, that could be the result of simply, again, if you're familiar with econometric methods, interaction terms, the standard errors go up because you have the standard errors of both terms sort of coming together. And so the standard errors are higher. And so the actual point estimates were positive, right? So the coefficients on those interaction terms were positive. So, you know, some indications that maybe there were some synergies, especially on prospecting versus retargeting. So if you had high budgets for both prospecting and retargeting, you get a bigger bang for the buck than just increasing one or the other. So some potential evidence there, but it wasn't statistically significant. But again, that could just be, we just didn't have enough sensitivity. So we need more data for that. Fantastic question. Go ahead, Adam. I don't think I have time to read.
Awesome. So I think we just have one final question. Thanks everyone for the participation. It's been a really good discussion. And Jeff, thanks so much for the amazing answers. We have one from Wahiba. I hope I'm saying that right. What about the role of the creative in the retargeting?
Yeah, so we couldn't test that, obviously. So that's something I would love to do in the future as well, is test the creative, like do some A/B tests at the same time, or structurally, right? So can we structure, I suggested we structure our prospecting ads and our retargeting ads at different information and different sort of flow of appeals. And I would love to test that. We couldn't test that. Frankly, I think the results are pretty sensitive to that. I'm trusting that the client did a good job, and our client has been spending so much money and does lots of A/B testing, so they know what ads are working. And so basically what I'm assuming is that they're doing something close to optimality, right? And so I think their creative was quite good across the board. But of course, that's a question I would love to test, and that is something we can test in future experiments as long as we have enough data and a long enough time frame to test both pieces at the same time.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining. We do have our final keynote of ProfCon coming up here in just a few minutes. Kristen Sheely, she's got a great topic lined up. But thanks again, everyone. Hope you enjoyed this session, and thank you, Jeff, for the great presentation.
Thanks, everybody.
See ya.